in order to do that effectively, you don't want to have to go through Congress. You don't want to have a regular budget.
No, you don't want oversight.
You don't want oversight,
Where
accountability,
you spend
any of
your
that.
money.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so this explains why the CIA wanted this off-the-books income,
Yes.
this huge revenue source that had no oversight and no accountability attached to it.
Right.
Okay, so I think that's the basic background to understand this.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I think that probably even other people like Eisenhower and some of these other people that were in government and presidents were just fine with that because it's not my responsibility.
And
I
don't tell me
know.
about it either.
Yeah, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, and in fact, during Eisenhower, the benign Uncle Ike, the CIA overthrew the only democratic government Iran has ever had.
Yes.
In 1953, we
Mossadegh.
overthrew
Yeah.
Prime Minister Mossadegh. They had a parliamentary government, a very popular prime minister who wanted to nationalize the oil industry.
Yes.
And the British and the Americans colluded to assure that he was overthrown, and the Shah was installed as a Western puppet dictator.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, in 1954, a year later, the CIA overthrew and assassinated the president of Guatemala,
Yes.
Arbenz Guzman, who wanted to nationalize some United Fruit plantations that were not even in use. They were fallow, and he wanted the campesinos to be able to make a living.
Yeah.
And so he was assassinated by the CIA.
All of them painted as socialists and the one step to communism.
Yeah, it was all
When you start
anti-communism.
helping the people
Right.
with medical care, education,
Yeah.
start nationalizing resources to go to the people, that's a cardinal sin right there. That was Saddam Hussein's sin.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a little side note.
And Libya, which was one of the great socialist
Yes,
countries of
yeah.
the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Dinar
this is-
based on gold, tons
Yeah.
of gold that we talked about
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah. So anyway, we'll get to,
Yeah.
there's a whole history. The point is what you discovered there and what you discovered through your subsequent investigations, because it sets you on a path that led to this book.
Yes.
It's been going on ever since.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What got me, one of the things that got my attention was that all the evidence that we compiled, this guy Sutherland, that it did go to court in Washington, D.C. over a series of events, all of the evidence disappeared. Now, who
Now
did
Sutherland, explain who Sutherland was.
that? Sutherland was the only guy that we caught that was a courier for these bodies.
With this plane that that had to
Yeah, the
stop for
C-5,
repairs in Okinawa. That was, and the
Yeah.
courier was Sutherland, and he's the one who
Yeah.
was wearing a uniform but wasn't actually.
Right. He was, and the reason that we even got suspicious about it was that when the plane is on the ground more than 24 hours, you have to do a new mission number, and now you got customs and the host country involved in immigrations. You have all these people. It's not an in-transit aircraft anymore.
Yeah.
And it was on the ground more than 24 hours, and there were two couriers for these bodies, and both of them skipped. And so you load the plane up, and well, where are the couriers? Well, they're not here. What do you mean they're not here? And Japanese customs got involved, and they started checking some things, and found that these, one we never did ever find. Sutherland was caught in the United States on another plane that had a body on it that investigators believe had heroin in it that had been taken out. And this was going to Dover Air Force Base, Delaware. The plane was diverted into Andrews, and they searched the plane and all that, and then Sutherland was on this plane. And so he was charged with all sorts of things. The evidence disappeared that we had from Okinawa that the Office of Special Investigations had sent U.S. registered mail to the court. And I talked to the prosecutor who prosecuted this case several times, and he never got the stuff. And the only thing this guy was convicted of was wearing a uniform when he shouldn't oughta, and flying on a military aircraft when he was not authorized, and things like that. Nothing that had anything to do with drugs. Every investigation that I checked where some of these things happened, and there was household goods and all that. Drugs was never ended up in the court. Some of the people were they were punished for doing some things.
For something.
Yeah, but to open up that drug thing through military channels and government channels and all that evidence disappeared. I didn't find one case where it was prosecuted.
Yeah.
Well, it was sometimes it was prosecuted, but the charges were dropped or something happened like that.
Yeah. So there's very widespread government collusion in this industry. Now,
Tons of heroin coming into this country, a lot of it through military channels, and certainly not all of it in bodies.
Yeah.
Some of it was postal, some of it was household goods.
Yeah.
They had all sorts of ways of doing it, and the orders, the transportation documents and all that were always perfect. Every once in a while they would, I think probably most of the heroin in this country during this time came in military connected channels.
Yeah.
And we're talking, as much as 60 tons of pure heroin a year.
Let's talk a little bit about the value of heroin, why this was so important to the black operations of America then and ever since. I think you have a display here. You want to show the camera, show the audience.
Yeah, Jack. Let's see. We have a gold coin here, 4 ounces. Let's say it represents pure gold. And we also have 1 ounce of, actually it's powdered sugar, but let's say it's heroin.
Yeah.
And, I always ask the question, which of these is more valuable? 4 ounces of gold, and we think of gold being the most valuable commodity on the planet.
Yeah.
And the last I checked, the gold was roughly $1,250 an ounce. So 4 times that would be almost $5,000. Here's 1 ounce of what represents heroin. This is over $6,000, 6,000 some hundred.
Yeah.
Usually when you check these things, this is 5 times more valuable than this. And so it kind of brings home, because we always think when you come to heroin and cocaine, that we always think that it's some gangster, some street guy that can't read or write, that is at the top of this trade. And something that valuable, you're talking about hundreds of tons of the most valuable stuff in the world coming into the United States. And we're not even talking about the legal trade.
Yeah.
And who would control this? Would it be Pablo Escobar or something? And you notice every time they get these guys that's supposed to be the top guy, he ends up with bullet holes in him so they can't talk about it.
Yeah.
And he's the top guy.
Yeah.
Or is it somebody maybe in a pinstripe suit, blue suit somewhere? And who's at the top of this?
Or in a uniform.
Yeah. And the very top of it though is the financial elite.
Yeah.
That runs the country, the corporations, the banks, Wall Street, that this is absolutely the most profitable thing. We know about oil, we know something about armaments.
Yeah, let's not get into anything that's too broad and sounds, quote, conspiratorial. The banks are really central.
Yeah.
Because this money, when this stuff is sold, it's sold for cash. People don't write checks for it. And these enormous cash deposits are made in banks. It has to be laundered through banks, and it's deposited in cash. And these big international banks really depend on the heroin trade. Now, why don't you explain that for leveraging?
Okay, yeah. The value of stock, there's a formula, sometimes it's called the POP. How much money you actually have on hand, and the relationship or the correlation or the ratio between that and your assets and the value of your stock, or what you're selling your stock for. One stock costs so much. And
or leverage loans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the closer that relationship is between those, the more valuable your stock is as far as sales and people. This is a hot buy. You've got brokers that are out there saying the pop is good on this,
Yeah.
buy it now. And so that's
The more assets behind it, the safer it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's, and I've calculated just the illegal trade itself is close to, and it might even be more than $1 trillion a year in money, in revenue, that comes in there. That's a lot of money. $1 trillion is maybe 200 and some years where you spend $30 million a year. I mean, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But when you leverage that with the stock and you sell the stock, you're talking about something that if you take it out, it collapses. The stock market collapses, the banks collapse, Wall Street collapses. It's gone.
So you're talking about the cash taken in by these banks in the process of laundering drug money.
Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty clear, I think.
Okay.
Okay. And BCCI is one of the most notorious banks, Bank of Commerce and what is Credit International. I think it's based in Switzerland.
Yeah.
But they have branches all over the world.
Right.
And the international banking system itself, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, they depend on this asset base that comes in from the sale of drugs.
Yes. Yeah. Generally referred to as the Western banking system.
Yeah. And you mentioned one Australian bank that did a lot of laundering of the drug money coming out of Vietnam.
Yeah, the Golden Triangle.
Yeah.
And it was a Nugan Hand was the name of the bank. The only reason we don't know about it is because they went under financially, and there was an investigation. And the Hand was a CIA operative, and this money that was coming out of the Golden Triangle is laundered through that bank, and went from there to Swiss bank accounts,
Yeah.
but the Cayman Islands.
It was discovered through an investigation as a result of the failure of this bank.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in various places, a lot of them. Cayman Islands is another place
Yeah.
where it's tax-free, and they won't, unless you can prove that you violated Caymanian law, they won't give you any information. And so there's a lot of drug money laundered through there. There are other islands in the Caribbean
Yeah.
that do that, and offshore.
Yeah.
We keep it out there.
So this has been a staple, not only to maintain the CIA, black operations all over
Yes.
the world, the overthrowing governments and so
Yeah.
forth, but also the international banking, Western banking system itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like to throw a lot of it's so important to connect these dots. I mean,
Well, this was for years, I could not understand why the obsession was with drugs with the CIA. And I could not understand why they would be doing, why an intelligence agency is, and this is from Vietnam. And when I found out the enormous value of it and the effect on our financial systems, the whole Western financial system, and probably what you wanted to also talk about was that 9/11 and the stock market closed, and before that, how much opium was coming out of Afghanistan.
I didn't want to talk about 9/11 specifically. I mean, that's a whole other series of programs.
No, I
okay,
was.
but let's talk.
Here's another
Okay,
Golden Triangle.
Right.
Is what we're talking.
Let's go back to
Golden
the
Crescent.
map again. I want to refer to one more thing on the map, because I think it's very important. Now, you see right below Southeast Asia, you have Indonesia. That's that whole string of islands. Borneo is the big orange one, and Java and Sumatra is the big orange one on the left, and at the bottom is Java. And it's the fourth most populous country in the world.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, during the 1960s, when the Vietnam War was going on, and the streets were filling up with protesters, causing lots of trouble for the government, our GIs were rebelling, There's a whole book written about that called Soldiers in Revolt, and there was a film called Sir No Sir made about it. So there's a rebellion within the military. We had Vietnam veterans against the war camping out on the Washington Mall, raising all kind of hell with the government.
Yeah.
Okay. At the same time, we were overthrowing the government of Indonesia very quietly,
Yeah.
covertly, by proxy. They had a very popular elected president named Sukarno, who was a war hero from World War II and so forth. But he was a socialist. He wanted to nationalize industries. Indonesia had a lot of oil. So we funded and orchestrated the overthrow of this idealistic, decent, democratic, populist, socialist guy by the guy who became the brutal dictator of Indonesia,
Yeah.
General Suharto.
Yeah.
And his system is still in place, and it's still the dictatorship that we facilitated.
Yes.
Now, isn't that nice and clean and smooth compared with Vietnam? And
Yeah.
so I think what the U.S. empire did, it used that as a model, and then it went to South America, and we had what was called Operation Condor, with the six countries of the southern cone of South America, and that was launched initially by the probably assassination, but at least the coup against Allende, Salvador Allende,
Yes.
1973 in Chile. He then established his Operation Condor, the secret alliance between all these countries for anti-communism under the baton of Henry Kissinger, all of which came out in the 1990s through Freedom of Information Act exposure.
Yeah.
And wasn't that nice and quiet? Most
Yeah.
Americans have never even heard of that.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the next time the empire came out, was exposed, was in Iran-Contra in Central America in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And isn't it maybe coincidental, but you look at all these conflicts in South America, in Chile, with Allende.
Yeah, and Argentina especially. That was
Yeah.
where.
Well, yeah, in Peru, all these places where we've had conflict, and let's call this cocaine.
Yeah,
And it's right there.
yeah. And
And,
so the CIA started that, and that's what came out in the Iran-Contra hearings, that the CIA was funding the Contras, our covert operations, and the brutal dictatorship in El Salvador
Yeah.
that was, had running death squads and so forth against the populist insurrection.
Yeah, Guatemala.
Yeah, Guatemala's been
yeah.
ongoing for
All of these
ever
countries
since
that,
Arbenz Guzman was.
Honduras.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, this was all orchestrated out of Honduras, where John Negroponte
Yeah.
was the ambassador.
Yeah.
Okay.
A poster child for
Yeah,
psychopathy.
and so this stuff, we'll call it cocaine now, was being smuggled in the United States by Air America again, right?
Yeah, and by that time, I think though it
called
morphed
something
into
else, yeah.
Evergreen Airlines.
Yeah,
or,
yeah, right,
they had.
Yeah.
They kept the same map, same
Yeah.
template,
Yeah.
but they called it different. They put
Right.
different names on the tail.
And it was being smuggled into Mena, Arkansas. That was the entry point. And of course, that's when Bill Clinton was the governor there.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine that this huge smuggling operation by the U.S. government could have been going on in a state without the knowledge and permission and probable complicity of the governor.
Well, that's exactly why. Arkansas is a very sparsely populated.
Yeah.
It's only a few million people there.
Yeah,
And if you control the governor, it's like controlling the mayor
Yeah.
of a town.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's about the size of some towns.
yeah,
And if you control that, you can do whatever you want, and there's not too many eyes to see it. And Mena Airport was the point, and we were talking earlier, Barry Seal and all of this, it was connected
Why
around
don't you explain that a
Contra.
little bit? How about the plane crash and Barry Seal and so forth? How this came to light. This is not speculation.
Yeah, no. It's,
In fact, this is
yeah.
what set off the whole Iran-Contra
Yes, yeah.
exposure
yeah.
and the trial of Ollie North and so forth.
Yes, it did, and that's
Yeah.
the only reason we know anything about it, and maybe
Right.
even about Mena, Arkansas,
Yeah.
was because of Barry Seal and that plane crash.
Why don't you explain that for the viewers? Yeah.
And Hassenfuss, that
Yeah.
was, and it was another one of these deals where actually the planes were going, and these were CIA operations, and they're, you know, at an arm's distance, they got their own pilots.
So
and,
Hassenfuss was flying one of these planes.
yeah,
he was a
flying
private-
in one,
private
yeah.
contractor.
He was not supposed to have a parachute with him.
Yeah,
They didn't want dead men tell no tales.
yeah.
They didn't want any of this, and so his plane shot down.
In Nicaragua, wasn't it? Or Honduras? Or,
It was, let's see, Nicaragua, I believe.
yeah.
But it might have been, I'm not sure exactly where, but that's where it was
It
going.
was probably Nicaragua.
Yeah, and it was the same formula.
Yeah,
Arms in and drugs out.
yeah.
And the drugs going to South Central LA and all
Yeah.
the major institutions that we have, the cities
Mm-hmm.
that we have, and this thing gets shot down, and this guy's singing like the Temptations eventually. And
So anyway,
this
the
whole-
plane was
yeah.
shot down and he bailed out.
Yeah.
So he was captured by the Ortega government
Yes.
in Nicaragua.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that was exposed to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to the Iran-Contra.
Yeah, and the hearings in Congress and all that
Yeah.
eventually said that it was just a aberration,
Yeah.
that this was some
Yeah.
rogue people that just all of a sudden decided to fly arms
Yeah.
into Nicaragua and
Right.
and drugs out.
Yeah.
And I don't believe drugs was. Congress ran across that some, but they said, well, you know, it's just a rogue operation, and this was John Kerry that was the head of this committee. He knows full well
Yeah.
about all this.
Yeah.
And we had Dark Alliance that was written by Gary Webb, who ended up with 2 shots in his head.
Okay, explain that. This was exposed in the San Jose Mercury News
Yes.
by one of their reporters, Gary Webb.
Right.
And he ended up writing the book about it called Dark Alliance.
Yes.
And he ended up presumably, supposedly committing suicide, except it's a little difficult to understand how somebody can shoot themselves twice in the head.
You know, it actually is possible.
I know.
You know, there is this thing, and it's more common than people think.
Yeah.
And what people do when they go to shoot themselves. Now, the CIA drove them to it, whether it was suicide or not, because they ruined this man's
Yeah,
career. They
yeah.
ruined his life. They
He
ruined his
got
marriage.
fired from the Mercury News.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and he got sent podunk somewhere.
Yeah.
His career was done, and this was the New York Times and the LA Times and all that just vilified this guy.
Yeah.
And if you read his book, because it started off with the series Dark Alliance, but if you read this guy's book, this is a journalist of immense proportions.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You know, this guy and his references, it's airtight.
Yeah.
You know, what was going on was that there was cocaine and some heroin and all that from South America that's going into South Central LA, and you had Freeway Ricky Ross that was distributing it and all
Yeah.
this, and you were ruining that community and extracting the money out of it, using the money to overthrow governments. So this is the CIA's formula. They used it in Nicaragua as they used it everywhere.
Let me insert a personal note here. I happened to have been living in LA at that time, and I was developing drug abuse prevention programs for school districts.